It says I'm live. I always love YouTube. It's my favorite platform. Oh, let's see here. See if I get people popping on and make sure I'm working. I always tend to forget that I need to use. Hey, Chelsea. I always forget I need to use Google Chrome to make this work on my computer. So I always log into one browser and then have to log out and then log in here. Chelsea, can you hear me? Can people hear me? Is my audio working? Hello. I see some more comments coming in. Can you guys hear me okay? Yes. Somebody says yes. It's working great. Excellent. Okay, everybody. Well, then, now that I know that we're working, we're going to get going. We're going to do some questions that got sent in beforehand. We're going to do some questions that live. So feel free to put them in the comments and we'll go from there. I'm going to start with some of the ones that have the fewest number of questions so we can knock those out of the way. I don't have to worry about them. So I'm going to order Facebook first. We only had 2 on Facebook. We're just going to dive right in. We never have enough time. So here we go, everybody. Let's see here. Gia says, I put this question for the Twitter live stream. Didn't have Twitter. I don't remember answering it. If we did, I have no problem doubling up. Here we go. When Nathanael first meets Jesus and says, "You are the Son of God," what would he have meant? That's in John chapter 1. We actually are doing a John verse by verse study in session 6, and I just recorded this passage today. It won't be posted until January, but we got that recorded today. So good stuff. Anyway, Nathanael says to Jesus, "You are the Son of God." What would he have meant by that? What was their understanding of the Son of God? Since there is so little of that referenced in the Hebrew scriptures, the most powerful one I have found. I love what you're thinking, Gia. You're thinking Remez. You're thinking it's in the text. You're thinking, where have I seen that before? And I love that. I love where your head is at. Proverbs 30 has the verse, "What is the name and what is his son's name? Surely you know," which is a reference kind of indirectly to God and the sayings of Agur. And yet that's the reference there is probably more of a hyperbolic kind of assumes the negative, almost like God when he speaks to Job. It's really not a direct statement, more of people playing with that. Um, the author there, the proverb teller, kind of like toying with almost like a satirical, sarcastic, you know, who is this God? Like as if he has a name and a son and is human like us, that kind of a thing. But I don't know what they would have known. Yeah, and there's a lot of discussion about that. First of all, there's a discussion about, you know, what we have in the Gospels and what Jesus actually said. And I'm always going to assume that what we have in the Gospels is what Jesus actually said. I'm not necessarily going to ask a whole bunch of those, um, a whole bunch of those questions. But it's good to know that a lot of people do ask those questions. Textual scholars, people that engage in textual criticism, say, well, there's probably a gap between what Jesus actually said and what the gospel authors have him saying for their purposes. I'm okay if they're right about that. Like I'm not going to lose any sleep. It's not going to hurt my feelings any if they're right. But I'm going to assume that he did say it. Their understanding of son means it's not so much like the biological descendant type situation when they say that phrase, son of man, son of God. It's kind of it speaks of their essence. It speaks of where they're originating from, or what their essential, you know, makeup is. To be a son of man is to be made of the same stuff as man. To be a son of God is to be made of the same stuff. And I'm not thinking like Trinitarian theological substance. I'm just thinking when they say a son of God, they are saying that you are of God or from God. Um, Sometimes in my mind, this is probably like literally etymologically incorrect, but sometimes in my mind, I'll think instead of, I'll think of from, son from God, just because it sometimes connects me, I think, to a broader, probably more legitimate idea. But when Nathaniel says that, um, he is likely speaking of where Jesus is from, what Jesus is tapping into. It's darn near impossible for me to imagine a world where Nathaniel, in that moment, has the theological capability and capacity to go, "You are the son." They don't have that they don't have that understanding of that construct, a literal son of God, like the Trinitarian theological reality that we're going to know of and speak of later. So, anyway, great question. Let's see here. What's the other one here? My question may be more practical than theological. I like that. I like practical and theological. But I'd love your thoughts. I recently moved and started attending a large church, which is conservative, fundamentalist, and literalist in its understanding of the text, yet I was also introduced to Bema there. I have been excitedly discussing the revelations I've had through many of your teachings, and my heart tells me that I just want to be the Marty Solomon of this place. I can appreciate that, and I think I understand what you're saying, and I've been there. I can remember voices that influenced me and shaped me, and me wanting to be able to give that away to other people, to spread that to. I think I understand the energy you're speaking to there, the desire you're speaking to there. Obviously, be real careful. A Marty Solomon is not that great, so you don't really want to be the Marty Solomon of that place. You want to be the Kurt Kowalczyk. Is that how I say your last name? Kurt Kowalczyk. You want to be the Kurt Kowalczyk of that place. But I appreciate what you're trying to communicate, and I get that, and I appreciate what you're trying to say. Um, but on the practical end, I'm looking to get involved in some of the ministries here, and I keep wrestling with whether I should focus my efforts on creating space for Christians to consider the text in new ways, or focus on outreach, extending love to non Christians in our community, which may be nominally more important. And I would not have to risk becoming a progressively minded troublemaker, in quotes, to do so. I appreciate that too. I can resonate with that. I resonate with a lot of this practical question. I like it, Kurt. In my high school days, the rigidity of textual interpretation, everything literally happened exactly as it's written, that this church espouses proved fatal in my faith, which is why my heart is so set on helping people struggling with that. Yeah. Yeah, you've gone through your own deconstruction. Yeah. But I also recognize that I am the outsider here, not them. Good. It's healthy. So which way is up? Any thoughts on the matter would be greatly appreciated. Great question, Kurt. And it is very practical, but it's a good one. And it is my life, right? This is my life. And I'm not sure I can answer. Here's what I love about some of the things you're saying. A, I resonate and appreciate with like pretty much everything you're trying to communicate here. We could parse the nuances and the semantics that we're using, but I totally completely resonate with what you're trying to experience and shoot for here. Um, having said that, let's see, let's take a look here. I also love, by the way, Kurt, how you're aware that you can't do everything and have all of the conversation with everybody. Um, like you can't try to get Christians comfortable Christians to think outside the box. You can't challenge the status quo and do outreach to a group of people that needs to hear that. At least all in the same space. And I mean, like sometimes you can, but in a real sense, you've got to create spaces that help facilitate and accomplish these objectives. And you can't do it all in the same space. I appreciate that. I appreciate, Kurt, you seem to have this awareness of the larger social dynamic, which I really love. I don't sense a lot of hubris in your words. I sense a beautiful self awareness and a humble sense of like, this is my journey. I'm aware it's not everybody else's journey. All these things are beautiful things. Don't lose any of that. Beware of how we get pulled and drawn into self-righteous, I see clearly, nobody else. I don't sense that at all in this question. the danger is always there. And I also love, Kurt, how you're not wrestling with whether or not you should be in the community. You're trying to figure out which role you play in the community. Golly, I love that because speaking from experience, it's that um it's that reality staying tied to the community that's going to keep you not just accountable, but just healthy because we're healthier when we're around other people. That doesn't mean we need to like put ourselves in like dysfunctional, abusive, unhealthy situations, communities of people, institutions, whatever. But it does mean that if you can find a place to be you within a larger community that facilitates your belonging and tries to live out the gospel to the best of their ability, and they love God and they love other people, um, being in relationship, being in community with groups like that is really healthy and good for us. So, let's see here. And then let's see, is there anything else there that I no, I just think okay, so here's my thought on that question, Kurt. My thought on that question would be when you find yourself wrestling between which of these two spaces should I and not that you won't be able to like necessarily make a couple different spaces, not that you won't necessarily be able to pursue some of those things at the same time, but you will probably gravitate to one of those spaces more. For me, I have always felt very called and drawn to be in the space with, um, the status quo, um, well informed, whatever you want to say, grounded Christians to challenge their thinking, to challenge status quo, to sit in that community in a healthy way, not with a chip on my shoulder, not in a divisive way, but just to bring a conversation to that space. That's where I've always felt drawn and called. Let me turn off my notifications so this doesn't just sit here and buzz at me for the next hour and a half. But you may be slightly different. You may be somebody who's drawn to the outreach, who wants to create that space for those people that aren't the status quo, like they're on the fringes, whether they're coming in or headed out, or for whatever reason, just find themselves on the fringes, and you want to create a space that's accessible, a space of belonging. That's awesome. That's cool too. So I'm not sure I can answer that question. I'm not sure even you feel like you can answer that question, but only you, with maybe the help of others, will be able to truly get a good sense of the um, discernment on that. So anyway, there you go. All right, I think we got Facebook taken care of. Let me grab an email that came in, and then we'll see if there's anything on the live stream comments. So let's see here. I got an email that came in. Just some thoughts. Tonight on your live stream, will you take a moment to talk about city gates and the importance of them in ancient times? So we talk about city gates at the beginning of session 2. I also have a big lesson in Israel that I try not to ruin. I like to keep some stuff up my sleeve. I like to keep some tricks in the bag, if you will, so that I don't just tell everybody all my lessons that they experience over in Israel. So I try to keep some of this there. But city gates have become one of the things that in archaeological digs, the team spends a lot of time trying to excavate. There's a few ways that historically they become really helpful. You can do a lot when it comes to dating a city by the type of gate that is constructed there. Different gates only appear at different periods of history, and we've yet to kind of find too many exceptions to that. So gates can be super helpful there. Gates served primarily, first and foremost, a very practical purpose. Obviously, you have a city, you put a wall around a city, and then you have a gate in that wall where obviously people go in and out of the city, but it allows you to basically set up defense for when the army attacks. They either have to build a siege ramp, they have to get over your wall, they have to get through your wall, or they have to get through your gate, and the gate serves as a bottleneck. And the gate has, I think we have a diagram of this when we do the discussion on city gates at the beginning of session 2. Crossroads of the earth, maybe, I think is the episode. But but you'll have all these rooms where as an act of defense, they'll put soldiers or different kind of defense mechanisms there. And as you try to you get pinched into this bottleneck, and you can defend a city. You can have an army of thousands outside the city gate, but only, 6 can get through the doorway at a time. And it's just really becomes impossible to take a city through the gate. Therefore, you have all these stories of people building siege ramps, trying to knock holes in walls, all those kinds of things, because the gate becomes a very effective measure of defense. Here's the deal, though. That's the very practical reason that they exist. But the average city gets attacked once every 70 to 90 years. They undergo some kind of a siege. Now, some cities more than other because of their location. The average city in, Bronze Age and Iron Age, all those kinds of things, gets attacked once, about once a century, just under a century. Once a lifetime, really. And so what do you do with this gate for all those other years and decades that the gate is not having to be used for literal defense? Well, we didn't necessarily know until about 20, 30 years ago. We started doing excavations in the city gates, and we noticed the same exact things. We kept finding bowls and measuring utensils and all kinds of things that would have been used for distribution. And we discovered that the city gate is where a lot of I think we might use the term welfare, the city welfare would take place, because inside the city is where your more wealthy live. It's much more expensive to live within the protection of the city. And then outside the city lived the more poor, and then the middle class kind of lived right next to the city, or even in the city walls, in what's called casemate housing. Um, and so what you have the city gate becomes this place where rich and poor meet, where those that have more than enough kind of meet the world of those that don't have enough. And the city gate, particularly in the land of Palestine, became this place where um, some of that distribution, some of that surplus was used to minister and help the poor. And at first we thought, well, maybe that's a good theory. And then the more and more and more we found, the more we've discovered that's exactly how city gates were used. Actually, um, I guess we would say the stock exchange in Israel is actually called the Sha'ar, which means gate, in reference to the city gate. That's where politicians would sit. That's where your city council is. That's on all that sense. So anyway, so that's what city gate is. City gate is where I know on my trips we say this: city gate is where hope. You look at hope, like that's where you find hope. When Jesus says, "You are the light of the world," a city on a hill cannot be hidden. The image that he's drawing off of is that you have you are outside the city. You need whatever protection, provision, and you come around. You come over the rise of that hill, and you look off in the distance, and you see a city on a hill. That image is an image of hope. And so Jesus speaks to those he's teaching, and he says, "You're called to be hope to others. You ought to be people that when they look out and when they see you, they understand and they see hope." Let's see here. So then Jim goes on. He says, "Can you talk about your vision or maybe your heart's desire as we become people of the text, what you envision Bema followers becoming like? To love on my neighbor as Yeshua would, but the how comes to mind." Okay, so I think Jim is pulling on this idea that part of what we ought to be as followers of Jesus is city gates to the world. That image, that beacon, that light of the world, that city on a hill, that point of hope. Now, at one point, Jim says, "What you envision Bema followers to become like." I don't have a vision for Bema followers, just so you guys know. I have no interest in starting a following. Bema, the last thing we need is to become some cultic group of people that listen to a podcast. Here's the thing: people that listen to the podcast come from all kinds of different backgrounds, all kinds of folks that um, Presbyterians and non-denominational and charismatic Pentecostals and and Catholics and people that gave up on the church years ago and people that aren't quite sure, and we just have all kinds of people. And I don't want to ever try to draw us into some uniform practice, but I do hope that exactly what I think Jim is asking for, that within our own contexts and within our own expressions of faith, we would be those things. So if we do have a church home that we're excited about, that we would be city gates in that place, both in our church and outside of our church. If we if we had to give up on the church for whatever reason, and we find ourselves in at least a season, if not indefinitely, where we find ourselves trying to hold on to Jesus, but kind of wandering on our way without a church home, that we would recognize that we can actually find a sense of identity, a sense of missional identity and calling in being city gates. I love Jim's thought there. I think he goes on here. As I've thought about it, and as I've stood in a few ancient city gates with you, he has. That experience, standing there and experience what it must have been like for them in their time to have a place to go in time of need. Could this be one of the paths you envision the Bema family to become like? Again, I would want to pause before I say anything about what the Bema family ought to be. Um, uh, the Bema family, that we would have some kind of communal identity. But I appreciate what Jim's saying, and I would say yes. Continuing that pattern of thought to not only become people of the text, but to become city gates, rotum bushes, acacia trees. The question I say to myself almost every day: how many tamarisk trees have I planted today? And so on and so on. For me, that is the picture I see in Jesus. That we would use these images to remind us of the how to love my neighbor as Jesus would. And so many of the images there that Jim draws on are images of blessing, images of being hope to others, bringing light to darkness, bringing order to chaos, bringing shalom to brokenness. And I appreciate that. Yes, I'd say yes. Um, and I would stop. I think Jim is asking for a little bit more practicality on the how, and I appreciate what he's asking. I don't know if I would give that, because each one of our contexts is so different. I think about Jim's context. I think about where he's at in life, um, where he's at in his own age and maturity, and his family, and his context in California, and where he goes to church, and all those things. Like I think of all that stuff, and I think, man, Jim's gonna be in a wildly different situation, applying the concept of city gates, of being people who love God and love others, is gonna be wildly different there than it's going to be for, say, the group of people I met just this last week in DC. They just have a wildly different context. They're in a different place of life. They've all got little tiny kids, 1, 2, 3, 4 years old. Um, eh, Stuff is different. Being city gates in that context is different. Their church is different. Their experiences are different. So, eh, I think Jim wants more, but I'm gonna stop there and just say, yes, I think that's the task. That's not for Marty to define. That's for all of us to wrestle with and say, what does that look like in our context? What does that look like at that? Because here's the other thing. Even if we were in the exact same context, and we're not, even if we were, we're still all unique individuals, and we're all at different places along the journey. Like, we're all, even if we were in the exact same context, some of us are further along than others, or moving faster than others, or looking in a particular direction that, and so we have to be really aware of who we are, where we're at, what we're called to, how to engage all that stuff. All right. So there we go. We got Facebook taken care of. We got email taken care of. Let's swing over to the live stream questions and see what we got that's come in here. Everybody saying hello, 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 hello. Everybody, hello. Um, Excellent. You're going to catch, Patrice is catching the replay. Absolutely. Can you reshare Patrice's question? Can you reshare your view on personal giving to the poor? I don't know what that view would be, only that we should do it. And obviously, there's all kinds of there's issues of mercy and there's issues of justice. And those are two different things. And so I want to be the kind of person that has, I think Torah invites us to be the kinds of people that have open hands. We're open-handed. Um, Obviously, with systems that try to reach out and engage in mercy and justice, there might be more kinds of systems, administrative systems that are actually more beneficial and actually more helpful in giving people assistance, ways that are more productive than other ways. I used to run a ministry to those that struggled with homelessness for 4 years in Twin Falls, and there was a real way where you would try to run that system in the way that did the most good, was actually the most loving approach for the most amount of people. So, but when it comes to my personal walk and my personal giving to the poor, I just want to be somebody who has more open hands than I did yesterday. Right now, I'm in kind of a 2 year sabbatical time right now. When I say that, I don't mean like I'm away from work for 2 years. I'm in kind of a 2 year period here where I've changed some work rhythms. I've pulled away from some things. I'm engaging some other things. One of the things that I am trying to engage in this 2 year period is trying to be much more active and intentional about giving to the poor. And so I'm carrying around a kind of a different kind of a generosity fund with me so that when I see somebody, I can just say yes. And I get all the questions. Like I get it. I get it. I understand that, well, they're just going to buy beer, or you gotta, that's really not helping them. Like I get all those. Again, there's issues of mercy and there's issues of justice. Issues of mercy is seeing somebody in need and simply like showing mercy to them, like giving that cup of cold water to somebody who's thirsty, that little bit of relief in the moment, mercy, respite, that kind of thing. But then there's issues of justice. I remember Shane Claiborne writing about it's one thing when you're standing on a bridge and you see somebody, a body floating down the river, somebody struggling, and so you get down and you pull the struggling person out of the river. That's mercy, and then here comes another one. You pull them out of the river. That's mercy. But then you see another one, and here comes another one. Justice is where you walk up the river to see what's going on, to do something about whatever is causing people to become trapped in the river in the first place. There's mercy and doing what's necessary for the thing right in front of you, and there's justice. And both of those things have their place. And they're different objectives, and you go about them in different ways. And some of us love to be about both of those, but both of them. So sometimes in my brain, I have to do this like, am I engaging in mercy or justice here? Because I go to engage in mercy, and my justice brain kind of starts to go off, and I have to be like, no, what this is an act of mercy. And then if I'm actually engaging in works of justice, I have to make sure that my mercy voice is put in its proper place so that I can actually pursue the objectives that I need to pursue in acts of justice. So those are just some thoughts. I know I know I want my children to see me being open-handed. When I see people in need, I want to be somebody that says yes as much as I can, rather than saying no because I can be justified in doing so. Christine, in Genesis 9, when Noah curses Ham's son, Canaan, was it because Noah could not curse Ham? Because at the beginning of chapter 9, we see God blessing Noah and his sons, and Noah could not curse them. Um, not in the Jewish understanding, no. And we actually cover this in the episode. So if you're really early in the episodes, keep on listening. And I'm going to say this probably maybe a couple times tonight. We have a lot of people that get really hung up in the slog of Genesis at the very beginning. And there's so much to learn. Do not stop there. Like there's so much to learn. You've got to keep going. Brent Billings will say all the time, like binge listen, get all the way caught up to real time. You can always go back and start to zoom in and zone in, but you want to see the big picture. And guys, like we got to get to Jesus, like the gospels. There's super good material up there. Like that's the whole point. Like we're trying to get there. And yet I know people that just kind of like cycle through Genesis over and over and over again. So don't get stuck in the beginning. So keep listening, Christine, because when we get to Noah, we talk about what the Jewish concept is behind why looks like, let's see, she's answering down here. Listen to it and listen 3 times. So we address that in the Jewish understanding. No, it's not that Noah can't, it's that Noah chooses to curse the son as an act of vengeance. At least that's the Jewish understanding of that story. That's what they that's what they're trying to. Okay, yeah, I see you commenting on there. So that whole story is about vengeance and revenge. And so because Ham takes away Noah's ability to procreate, and instead of cursing Ham, what Noah does is pay him back as an act of vengeance and revenge to curse his son, and that's the takeaway. The takeaway from that lesson in the Jewish mind and Jewish tradition is that vengeance, the danger of revenge, the danger of vengeance is that it gets passed on to generational. It can become a national reality because, as you know, the land of Canaan is going to play some pretty big roles in the story. So the point here isn't the mechanics of cursing and how that works and interpersonal. The bigger lesson there in the Jewish mind is the power and danger of vengeance when we step into the role of God and seek to take revenge. Um, and yeah, I see that question down there. Um, was wondering if it was because he could not that uh no, not that he shouldn't be cursing anybody anyway, so it's not that he can't. um in fact, he steps into a role. He's the only human being in the scripture outside of God that engages in that kind of a curse. So there's all kinds of things about that he shouldn't be doing, yet he's doing it anyway. Let's see here. Looks like Chelsea answered Jackson's question. I tried messaging you on Facebook about this, but deleted it because it wasn't well thought out. What do you know about the idea that Asherah was worshipped as Yahweh's wife by the Israelites? Oh, yeah. This is the idolatry of the Old Testament, right? Our Old Testament is full of, let's see, what is the next question? In my head, it almost would make poetic sense that God would have a wife. Um, and that he would model the relationship directly for us, but apparently scholars say it was edited out of the Bible. Not so much edited out of the Bible. In fact, that we can actually show that in the scriptures a bunch. But that is so. One of the places that you see that is I'll take students to the dig at a rod, tell a rod, and you can see there the Holy of Holies. Actually, we found a reference. I can't remember if it was on a plaque or a stela, but we found a reference to Asherah as essentially, I don't remember, can't remember if it calls a wife, but the mistress, the lover of Adonai, the God of Israel. So that is absolutely a historical. It's not even debated, and like that is absolutely what they were engaged in. But that is the idolatry. That's the syncretism that we see them engaging in all throughout the Old Testament. That shows up at the time of history when you're reading about that all in the book of First and Second Kings, where you're hearing all about. Well, it's Jezebel that brings in the Asherah poles, right? It's Jezebel that synchronizes this worship. And so you see the people of Israel struggling with this pagan syncretism and this idolatry that is absolutely taking place. Um, let's see here. Jed Rosner. Wonder if there's any relation to Jen, my new friend Jen. That'd be fun. Jen and Jed. Anyway, hi, Jed. Jewish by birth, never culture tradition. How would you recommend getting started on observing those holidays traditions? I've been observing the Sabbath for several years. Great question, Jed. If you're Jewish by birth, I would recommend going to Chabad.org, Chabad. Looks like Chabad, but it's Chabad, Chabad.org. And that's it's a Hasidic Orthodox a website that offers all kinds of guidelines and information for Jewish practice, Jewish holidays. It's the site that my family and we use, and I would just start learning. And I would give yourself loads and loads and loads of grace as you start to engage it and as you start to learn. Do not heap on yourself. Do not try to have this comprehensive understanding of all the rules and all the things and all the traditions and all the to this day, my family continues to add a new little tradition almost every year. We just kind of keep expanding. keep growing, all that kind of stuff. So give yourself loads of grace. Right here on my YouTube channel, excuse me, I actually have one of my playlists. If you go to the channel and find my playlist, one of them is called Festival Edition, and that would be a starting place for that. Um, it's always great if you can find others. It gets to be a little tricky, especially if you're coming from a Jesus perspective. Different messianic groups and practice can be confusing, problematic. I'm going to take issue with some of the theology, those kind of things. I think that stuff matters. Having said that, it's very difficult if you are coming from a Jesus perspective to connect to a more traditional Jewish community. So it gets to be a little dicey. It's not impossible. Just give yourself loads of grace and find a group of people that's going to also give you grace, and carry it as best you can to the best of your ability in your context. So there. Yeah, absolutely. It's a great question, Jed. Oh, those were my friends in DC. They were, Jackson. I'm sad they didn't tell me you guys were getting coffee. I would have crashed. Did I get coffee in DC? I had a dinner in DC. I don't know. Maybe they did see. John Jackson, what's your daily routine? How do you maintain your daily routine on the road? What do your workouts look like these days? My workouts is in my physical workouts. That one's easy, non-existent. Oh man, can't you tell? Woo. If you've seen me live and in person, John, you know that I am not working out much at all. I've put on about 30 pounds since I last worked out. I need to get back though because Israel's coming. Israel is coming. I need to be in shape. So let's see here. I think starting late January, I have agreed. I've made a commitment to my wife, who loves the gym, by the way, that I'll do 50 burpees a day for 50 days. That's our commitment. We're going to do that together. We'll see how it goes. But I need it. I need it. Let's see here. What else did you say? My daily routine. So there's a YouTube video on my channel actually that goes through my whole. It's a little dated. Let's see. What's the one that I could connect you to? It's an old video. The one I'm thinking of is actually a really old video from when I lived back in Moscow, like maybe 6 or 7 years ago. And that maybe 5, I don't know, 4 or 5 years ago. I don't even know. But that video, I think, was called A Day in a Life, A Day in the Life. And it's called actually the whole series, the Day in a Life series. I did a whole series. Actually, I think it was 2018 because it was a part of a blog I did. Maybe it was 2017. It was a part of a blog I did. And one of my monthly installments was A Day in a Life. So I took 12 videos, one a month for that whole calendar year. And I did a day in the life. So if you find those videos, you can watch those. That was from a past life. Like that was a whole, things are not the same way today, but the spiritual discipline portion of it is almost exactly the same. Almost exactly the same. I did do a thought of the day video more recently, within the last 4 or 5 months. Since summer, I did a thought of the day video where I talked about, I think it's called Thought of the Day, writing the text. And and on that video, I talk about at least a couple of my disciplines. And then in the description of that video, I link it there too. So I'm literally doing 2 burpees a minute every minute while watching you right now. You are killing me. I love that. That is so great. How's the family responding to your uptick in travel? They've done well. My family are champs. We try to stay really disciplined. This last 4 to 6 months has been horrible, and it's been my fault. I'm the one that made it that way. Nobody to blame but myself, and it doesn't have to be that way. So there's going to be a downtick in my travel, starting in 2022. I'm creating way more space. I got 3 trips, 2 to Israel and 1 to Turkey in the middle of that year, and I do have a few speaking engagements. But I'm going to be home for like all of February, and I'm not going anywhere. Please don't write me and ask me to go somewhere. The answer is no. I need to be home for a while. Then I go to Israel in March. I got a speaking engagement in April. I got a conference, a work conference in May. I have to go to Turkey in June. I'm going to do a family vacation in July. I go to Israel in August. And maybe that sounds like a lot. It's actually that's a much more calm schedule than what I just did for the last 5 months. And that was my fault. That was my fault. So, we're done. I'm home. I leave on Tuesday with my family for a 3-week kind of holiday getaway, taking some vacation. My daughter has a bat mitzvah. We're going to celebrate that back in Idaho. We're going to have a great time. We're going to see my family. Probably going to see my in-laws for Christmas, and then my family the week after, and be able to come back home. So we're on the verge of getting in a healthier place. My family's been champs, and they're doing great, and we love being in Cincinnati, and everything's just been really cool. So, Dick Dixon, I struggled connecting to the live stream. Have the questions asked on Twitter already been covered? No, they have not, Dick. I hope you're still with us. I hope you stayed, because they have not. I've done Facebook and I've done email. I have not done Twitter. I hope you're with us, Dick. Um, let's see here. Hey, One Life Henderson. Love you guys. Miss you. Let's see here. Hey, Dick's still here. Excellent. Awesome. What is the best order to watch the Ray Vanderlon series to make them more chronological? Dave, I just thought of this the other day. Did I never respond to you with a photo? My goodness gracious. I wish I could like pick up my computer and like walk it over there for you so you could see it. It's right there. They're right there. I put them in chronological order. Hold on. Let me see if you can hear me. Can you still hear me? I hope you can still hear me. If I shout, can you still? I can't even see. If anybody's telling me if you can hear me, I can't even see. Hold on. All right. We're answering this question, David, once and for all. Here's the you guys are great. I love these live streams. They're a ton of fun. I have a thing for historical chronology. I like to think about things in chronological order. So I reorganized his videos. I also think that's awesome because his first videos were really old and really dry and really hard to watch. They're not nearly as entertaining or inspiring. And so if you reorder them, it puts the oldest ones kind of in the middle, and that's awesome. So here's how I've reordered them. I start with the Exodus, right? So I start with God Heard Their Cry, DVD number 1. It's actually not DVD number 1. It's volume 8. God Heard Their Cry, volume 8. The next one, Walking with God in the Desert, volume 12. That's actually the last video. He actually made some more videos of this series, but I had 12. I have the first 12. He did a conclusion on 12 and said he was done making videos. And then he kept making videos. And as an act of protest, I didn't buy any of the new ones. So 12 was the last one that I have. So I go 8, 12, Walking with God in the Desert. I then go Fire on the Mountain, which is number 9, volume 9. So 8, 12, 9. I then do volume 1, which is Promised Land, which is his first and oldest DVDs. Mix it in there, see? And then I do volume 10, which is With All Your Heart. Volume 10, With All Your Heart. And then I do volume 2, which is Prophets and Kings. Prophets and Kings. Then I do volume 3, which is Life and Ministry of the Messiah. And then I do volume 4, which is Death and Resurrection of the Messiah. Followed by Path to the Cross, which is volume 11. 2 more. Early Church, which is volume 5. I feel like I'm missing some DVDs. Did somebody sneak into my house and steal my DVDs? I think they did. Volume 6, In the Dust of the Rabbi. The The one I'm missing is something about walking in the dust of the rabbi. Um, when the rabbi says, "Come," oh, I can't remember. Maybe I'm not missing anything. I feel like I'm missing six. I am missing six, volume six. I might be missing a few DVDs here, but anyway, this is as good as I can do today. So here I got 8, 12, 9, 1, 10, 2, 3, 4, 11, 5. I feel like 6 is out of order. I feel like 6 should be, nope, it's Revelation. Yeah. You might swap the last two. You might swap 5 and 6, but anyway. Oh, did I say 6? It's 7 that I'm missing, apparently. It's 7 that I'm missing. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 8. I have 2 8s, 7 that I'm missing. And I'd put that right in between, right before Path of the Cross. Should go right there. There you go. Walk through them all step by step. David, finally got your question answered. That's how I do it, because it puts the content in more historical, chronological order. And in a true act of genius, I just dropped the stack on the floor and they all fell out of order. So I'm going to have to watch my own live stream to see what order I had them in. All right, let's see what we got. I would like to start reading commentaries. What would you recommend to start? I hate commentaries. Honestly, I hate commentaries. So I just couldn't even tell you where to start. Because I just can't stand commentaries. So I have no good recommendations for you. Sorry, fly fishing fan. Let's see, what would I say? I would say, like, if you go to bemadiscipleship.com/resources, you can see all the resources that we've recommended on the podcast. Those are the resources that I would obviously recommend and did. But yeah, I don't think commentaries are actually a useful tool. I've been critiquing commentaries for quite some time. They're a useful tool. I think we've gotten so used to using them, and there's way better tools to use our own Bible study tools, to do contextual work, to have a wider breadth of perspective before we just listen to one voice talk about their insight on it. And obviously there are some commentaries that I would love. There are some authors, and when Ben Witherington does work, it's going to be great, whether it's a commentary or not. When James Dunn or Mark Nanos write about Romans or Galatians, yeah, sign me up. Obviously, we recommend books like Thomas Lancaster's Holy Epistle to the Galatians. So, I mean, we're going to recommend some commentaries, but I don't have like commentaries that I like. Start here with this commentary set. Let's see here. Marty? I'm literally doing two. Yeah. Okay. Sorry. Let's see. One of the podcast episodes, you told a story about 2 Jews who spent all their time secluded in a cave studying the text. What was that episode? Essenes. Where did that story come from? I can't remember what episode I brought that up in. I do know that a copy. It's not from Heschel. The story comes from, I want to say, the Agadah. It's in Jewish Midrash, is where the story originally is from. I want to say it's in the Agadah. I could be wrong about that, but where I did run into it and where you can find it is in The Sabbath by Abraham Joshua Heschel. In Abraham Joshua Heschel book called The Sabbath, that's where you can find that parable told in all its glory. I actually really enjoyed the podcast episode and YouTube video with your wife and them. Yeah, my wife is great. She makes everything better, all of it. I love to hear and see about your humanity, and love how personal those are. That's good. Luckily, I haven't had to pay the price for being slightly vulnerable and transparent. I love that too. I love to do that for people, because I do. I want to be personable. I want to be, yeah, it's just healthier. It's better. It's good. We recently met over dinner in Richmond. Oh, fly fishing fan. We met recently, had a great evening of conversation. Fantastic. Sorry, I didn't have a better answer for your commentary question. But yeah, that was a good dinner in Richmond. Either one. I don't know which dinner it was, but either dinner. They were both good. What about 7? Yeah. Okay, so Michaela, yep, 7 is what I'm missing. 7, by the way, is one of my favorites, so I'm really miffed now that somebody stole my number 7. Look at me make assumptions, but I had it, now it's no longer there. Maybe I lost it. I had 2 copies of number 8. Maybe I should check my, both my copies of number 8, maybe number 7's sitting in there. Who knows? Let's see. What resources can I look to view how Jesus in Old Testament viewed sexuality, sex outside of marriage? I see sexual morality in the Bible, but don't really see. I like how you're trying to ask that question. I think answers there. Like, you're not asking this question, but like oftentimes with issues of sexuality, often the questions will pertain to LGBTQ, all those kinds of things, and that those are topics we always try not to speak to. I appreciate the fact you're not asking that, and you're asking something else, and yet if I offer recommendations for that, it's going to lead to the exact same issue because sexuality is such a explosive powder keg for particularly evangelicals, and we can't seem to have a healthy dialogue about it. We just lose our marbles. So, um, I try to make sure that we're having those conversations in the healthiest places, in the right places, and so, um, I'm gonna leave those recommendations for, smaller, local conversations where stories can be, known. We can hear stories, we can know stories, we can hopefully steward stories well, because me doing that on a YouTube live stream, um, is probably just not nearly as helpful, and obviously, you know, how many people have lost their career over talking one way or another about the topic of sexuality, so I appreciate that. Oh, The Sabbath by Heschel is fantastic. Highly recommend to everyone. Heschel is amazing. He is one of the greatest thinkers, Jewish thinkers of the modern era. I think I did read that story in Heschel and couldn't place it. Yes, you are welcome. Oh, David, been watching you, Rob Bell, for the last 9 months. That lead to all kinds of questions. So I have read through about 3/4 of the Tanakh over the past 6 months, which created more questions about my faith. Yeah, reading through Tanakh will do that. Absolutely. I can't find anything solid on the Trinity or Old Testament on YouTube. Also struggling with finding Yeshua in the Old Testament. The Tanakh teaching leans more towards a Messiah that is a man as opposed to man. Yeah, absolutely. So I'm going to recommend listening to the podcast because we try to speak to all of that super directly. As you and we try to journey you through the podcast at exactly kind of the right pace and speed, and giving you the tools when you encounter the prophets to know like what you're looking at and how to engage them and how to read them. And that's why we always say like don't skip session 2 and don't bounce around, because the whole journey is designed to just kind of keep giving you little bits so you can keep building in this repertoire of what you have, and the tools you have to work with as you engage the scriptures. I wouldn't necessarily argue with the things that you've pulled out of that. I wouldn't necessarily argue with that. I work really hard to show. I don't think the Old Testament is talking directly about Jesus at all. I'm going to explain that in session 2. I want to read the Tanakh as a Jew reads Tanakh. I don't want to let a supersessionist Christian worldview cloud the way that I read those. So I want to read them through the lens of how the author and the audience. I think that's the inspired. I do believe in the inspiration of the Bible, and the inspired conversation is one that's happening between author and audience. If I can understand that question, I can understand. So I'm not necessarily even going to necessarily argue with that. Obviously, the Trinity. That's a Christian construct later. I don't necessarily disagree with it. To do so would make me unorthodox, but uh, you're not going to find it in the Bible because it's literally a Christian construct driven by philosophy. That doesn't make it right or wrong. It just means when Christians lived in a world that was being dominated by Gnosticism, and after they kind of booted the Jews out of the conversation, they now needed to grapple with theology, and they only had a certain amount of tools to work with. And so they grappled with theology kind of on their terms. And the Trinity is simply a theological package that tries to articulate what the Christians' understanding was about who Jesus was. And all those things were Like, we'll talk about that in session 5, so we'll cover that in the podcast as well. I mean, all those things had their place because it's important. Like, you have one group of people saying Jesus wasn't even a man. You got groups of people that saying, questioning Jesus' divinity. All these things have huge theological implications. So defining those things is really important. And yet we only had a certain amount of tools in our toolbox, and then we really took those conclusions and then we weaponized them. All kinds of wacky stuff happened out of that. So I wouldn't say like you're way off base necessarily, and what you're looking at there as you're studying Tanakh. I'd be like, yeah, no, yes. Typically, we don't even study Tanakh. We just study systematic theology, and then we just kind of use the Bible to prop up. So that's what our podcast journey is all about. So I just want to encourage you to just use that as a tool and go through that, because there's a lot there. So there's a lot that I can't do in a live stream, but I can do over 200 episodes of a podcast, which I know sounds super daunting, but that's the right way to do it rather than like 2 or 3 minutes on a live stream. So yeah. Thank you, the Darster 14. I appreciate the respect and the smiley emoji. I double dog dare you, Joel says. You can't double dog dare me nothing, Joel. Can you say 3 nice things about Martin Luther? He really helped change the trajectory of faith coming out of the medieval era. And I mean that in a positive sense, so that's a nice thing. I appreciate his chutzpah to pursue grace to a theological end. And I don't know if Luther gets all the credit for this, but I mean, think about Bema and the passionate desire to put the word of God in everybody's hands in a language that they could know and understand. Double dog dare me now, Joel. There. Okay, there you go. 3 nice things. I have to admit that was harder than I thought it would be, but we got it. Been going into Bema pretty hard for about 3 years, sharing with friends. Friend kept asking me to prove the Midrash as an older source in the Bible. Can you help me with a response here? That's always the Midrash is not. And it's a great actual pushback from your friend. We always have to be aware of. So if you go on my YouTube channel, there is a video called Bema FAQ Midrash. And it's a great just kind of introduction to what the Midrash is and how it functions. But one of the things we have to be aware of is how much of the Midrash is from a later date that post-dates the Gospels and Jesus and the apostolic era. And that doesn't mean they're useless. It just means we have to hold them in their proper place and realize that they're not maybe as useful as far as a historical reference point. Again, they're a great commentary. They might add some great insight, but they may not. Now, some of the Midrash is historically relevant. Some Midrash does predate it because we do have records of a story being told. Abraham in the furnace. The story of the one we do for the Mount of Transfiguration in session 3. There are a handful or 2 or quite a few probably that I don't even know about that absolutely predate the time of Jesus by at least a few decades. Now, the next layer of that conversation is, say, like when you're dealing with the Mishnah. Now, the Mishnah is decades after Jesus. There's no doubt about that. But there's also no doubt that the Mishnah represents the rabbinic conversation that existed, at least in part, during the days of Jesus. So during the days of Jesus, they're having a ongoing authoritative rabbinic conversation, Judaism is, that's later canonized in the Mishnah. But it wasn't created in the 2nd century. It was canonized and written down in the 2nd century. What that means is that those conversations are taking place. What can we say for sure? We can't. We can't. Proving that is not something that can be done. And I'd just be like, well, yeah, I'm not necessarily all that interested in proving it. I'm interested in using those conversations. The more historical they are, the further back they go, the more relevant they are. I'm interested in using that to gain insight into the Jewish perspective. I'm also interested in making sure that we're always careful we're not drawing too much conclusion on that we're using Midrash in the way it should be used and not projecting it historically into a place that it doesn't belong. So I work pretty hard to do that well. I'm sure I make a million mistakes. So anyway, there you go. Good question. You know, your friend raises a really good point, and we have to keep that in front of us. Oh, any thought about putting Bema sessions 1 through 5 into a book? Yep, yep, we have. We actually shopped that book idea around. It was one of two book ideas that we shopped around here recently, and we got a contract for a book that was slightly different than that. And part of the reason was because you already have Bema 1 through 5 in podcast form, and so it could happen someday. But that was the kind of the pushback against that. It's drafted. The synopsis is all done. Skeletons there. It easily could be done. Maybe someday it will. The book we're working on is actually slightly different. Similar though. Similar. Um, yeah. It'll. I think it'll scratch the itch you're talking about. All right, let's see here. We should go over to another. What do we got here? We got Twitter. Somebody asked about Twitter questions. Let's go to Twitter. Where did I leave off? Yes. Okay, we're gonna. Yep. Found where we left off. I'm gonna slide over to. Okay, I got David Willer's question about the Ray Vanderlon series. I got that one. I'm gonna slide over to my other Twitter account and get those. All right, here we go. All right. Oh, here's some questions from Dick Dixon. We're starting to get there, Dick. Here we go. Okay. I'm just going to grab these in different orders here. My family keeps making excuses for our youngest, saying that he's lost or doesn't know God instead of confronting his selfish, abusive behavior. Do you have advice on how to love a narcissistic kid, 23 years old, who's never wrong and takes advantage of our kindness, and he expects it? Is kind of a sense of entitlement. Obviously, I don't know the situation, so I couldn't give you any insight if maybe your perspective ought to be challenged at all. But as long as you have relationships that can help you do that, a good counselor, a good therapist goes a long way in helping you get insight to that. As long as you got a clear view of what we're talking about here, boundaries are important. Like there are people that have destructive behavior, and some of them are family members, parents, children, and that pain is real. Um, and the danger is having codependent relationships that enable that, or just like avoidant relationships, just kind of ignore it, kind of like what you're talking about here. Um, so any I mean, is it the Townsend and Cloud book about boundaries? Is it Cloud or Townsend? I can never remember. Anyway, somebody wrote a great book on boundaries, really famous book on boundaries. It's not like the most riveting read in the whole wide world, but it is kind of known as the staple work on establishing healthy boundaries, and those things are super important. There's certain behavior that is okay, and there's certain behavior that's not okay, and you don't have to um, you don't have to, in the name of love, just submit yourself to destructive behavior over and part. Sometimes the loving thing to do is to establish boundaries and clearly communicate what's acceptable and not acceptable. That can be done well, that can be done really poorly. So, and obviously there's probably a million variables. This is a family matter and a family issue and all kinds of insights. People, human beings are complex, nuanced, full of gray, not black and white. And so, um, just, yeah, there could be a million things I don't know and I don't see. That's the nature of dealing with relationships. Here's a question. What percentage of time should the average believing follower of Jesus spend consuming news, current events, politics, local, national, international? Assuming they don't work in journalism, how much time do you spend and what is healthy? Man, the average person, I don't know. I would assume it's different because of how we're wired. Everything from personality and temperament to how we engage social media, the kind of social media we're engaging in, how our reference point, our emotional reference point, our social reference point. Man, there's got to be a million things that change the answer to this for every human being. But we can say, I would affirm that either extreme can be super dangerous. Becoming obsessed with that, endlessly consuming those things can be super destructive. Not engaging it at all, completely ignoring it, can be super destructive just because of the ignorance that it creates. If nothing else, just the lack of an awareness of being able to speak into culture. That's not what Jesus modeled. It's not what the apostolic community, the early apostles, they understood current events. They could speak into current events with precision um, and do it in a compelling way. So I want to be able to know, like somewhere, I think you're wanting to strike this balance where you can be informed without being overwhelmed, where you can be informed without being controlled, where you can be informed without letting those things manipulate or have an influence or shape um, your circumstances, your joy, your good eye versus bad eye. There's got to be some kind of balance in my mind. So you ask a very personal question: how much time do you spend, and what is healthy? Um, I don't spend any time pursuing news and politics and those kind of things. I do like just kind of every day. I have Twitter. I have Twitter open on my um, desktop, so it's kind of always sitting right there, and I just kind of that's probably where I get a lot of just kind of my news that I'll then follow up on. I'll be like, what's going on here? What is that what is that conversation about? What is that news piece? And I might go digging or whatever. Sometimes if I have some time to kill in a doctor's office or if I'm, whatever, waiting for my wife at the end of the evening or, I might jump on the news app just to scroll through and see what's happening. Um, I don't watch news on the TV. I don't have a news source. Like I'm not a reader of The Guardian or the New York Times. Um, but I do have a lot of just social media apps. I probably get most of my flyby through my social media feeds. I don't even know if that's good. I did a YouTube video on the documentary The Social Dilemma. So, like, I get it. Like, you could probably critique that a million ways. I'm probably not your model here. Probably not the guy you want to model your life after. But I typically kind of watch my timelines and my news feeds on social media. And from there, I pick up, okay, I want to go figure out what's going on over there. I want to get that article. Anyway. I don't have a great answer for you there. All right, Dick, here's your question. Every year I hear the same narrative regarding Mary and Joseph during the Nativity story. When rereading Matthew 1:18 through 25, could this account be mostly taking place during the actual wedding feast? She's taken as his wife right after, and he wakes up, maybe unpausing the feast versus divorce. Um, it could be, it is very, very likely not, and there's no reason to try to have that explanation. The historical assumption. Um, so when you are betrothed in the ancient Hebrew world, you enter into a covenantal relationship. You are betrothed and you are essentially married. My favorite line from the Nativity story, which is one of my favorite Christmas movies, is when Mary's father is speaking to Joseph and Mary, and they're setting up the betrothal covenant. And he says, you are essentially to be united in all ways except that which lead to children. You are covenantally bound with a marriage covenant. And the only thing that you're not engaging in is the consummation of that marriage until the wedding ceremony. If that betrothal should be broken, then there's a covenantal breaking. Now, depending on what broke it, there's all kinds of legal this or that. It can be broken in ways that aren't necessarily loaded with shame and consequences. Typically, they're not, but they can be. But you're not allowed to go pursue another relationship, or you're covenantally bound. And then if something happens or something falls apart, there is a divorce that's required. Again, that divorce probably is less weighty than an unconsummated marriage divorce. um, it's going to have an impact, especially on the woman, a negative impact on her, unfortunately, in that patriarchal world. Um, but yeah, when you're reading that part of the Christmas narrative, very unlikely it's at the wedding feast. You could read it that way, but there's no hints in the text that that's what's going on at all. All the hints in the text and historically would say that they're in the period of betrothal. Um, She obviously gets pregnant. She's off to visit Elizabeth. The timeline, the details seem to be such that would speak to, I think, listen, there's a lot in the typical Christian narrative that I would critique. So I'm far from the guy that's going to sit here and be like, no, the Christmas story you're used to is excellent and awesome. Um, but that's not a detail that I've ever had an issue with. That one actually fits really. Actually, getting that one right actually really helps us truly appreciate the Christmas narrative and the Christmas story appropriately. So I'm actually all for that one. So good question. And I appreciate you actually being willing to hold that story in a new light, turn it, and who knows, maybe there's other stuff we'll learn or or whatever. Like maybe you're more right than I realize. But based on the tools that we have now, I appreciate how you're holding that and turning it and reconsidering. That's all good. That's healthy. That's awesome. I would not land there. Another question from Joel. Can you sketch out scapegoat atonement theory? What are your personal thoughts on seeing the cross and God's forgiveness through this lens? So, scapegoat theory, I'm not going to do a whole lot of work here, Joel, because we can't go on a YouTube live stream with probably a ton of people that are uh, like in session 1 or 2 and jump to session 4 and start blowing up their world with atonement theory. So, I can't do a whole lot here. We will talk about this in session 4. I can give you some books. The book on Rene Girard, who is kind of the grandfather of scapegoat theory. Scapegoat theory, as it refers to atonement, is a part of a larger school of theology that Girard he pioneered, known as mimetic theology. So I believe the book is called Mimesis and Atonement. It's edited by some other scholars, but it's essentially an editing of Rene Girard's work of mimesis. Now that's going to be an academic work. So if you're not into reading like really heady, thick, deep academic stuff, probably not the book you want to order. I think Michael Hardin did an ebook. It was called The Jesus Driven Life, where he kind of summarized Rene Girard. The basic idea here is that there's a lot of atonement theories. By the way, my favorite atonement book is A Community Called Atonement by Scott McKnight. Like, you read that. It's very, very helpful. He manages to like honor and respect and keep all these atonement theories in their proper place. The fact of the matter is evangelicalism loves to take one atonement theory and just like overuse it. Scott McKnight says atonement theories are like golf clubs. You need to know when to use the putter and when to use the 9-iron and when to pull out your driver. Like, you need to know what every atonement theory is good for and when to use it. And so he does a good job just kind of like drawing on those atonement theories and putting them in their proper place. I don't think he did a ton of work with scapegoat in that book at all, if I remember. But scapegoat theory is essentially the most Jewish of the atonement theories, where the idea there is that God takes our sin. In the Old Testament, there was the Day of Atonement. You had a goat that was sacrificed. The blood went into the Holy of Holies. It came out in stages, and it came out to the scapegoat. The sin was put on the scapegoat. The scapegoat was taken out into the desert. And the image was that God takes your sin and he sends it away. He literally sends it away. So, scapegoat theory, simply stated, without getting too deep into the weeds here, which is really what you're asking for, Joel, and I just can't do that here in a live stream. But um, the the simple theory is that God takes in Jesus. What God does is he takes our sins and he puts them on Jesus and sends them away, just like the sins on the scapegoat. That's how God's forgiveness works. He simply takes our sins and sends them away. Um, this really fits with what's going on in Hebrews. I think some 5 times in Hebrews it talks about atonement as the cleansing of our conscience. Now, Hebrews talks about our atonement as a lot of things, as ransom, as a substitute, as all in Hebrews. At least 4 or 5 of the different atonement theories you can find in the book of Hebrews. But the most dominant idea is that of scapegoat. It's not the only idea. It's not the only way to understand atonement. It's not the only way to understand the cross. So when everybody comes out of that conversation going, well, that means that Jesus didn't have to die. A, that's not what scapegoat theory says at all. And B, it's not the whole of the conversation. So if all that like freaks you out, just hang in there and keep listening, because when the time is right and you get to session 4, we'll unpack all that and it will be glorious. But not before then. All right, we've done Facebook, we've done email, we've done Twitter. We have a ton of questions over on Instagram. Let me try to see if I can get caught up on the live stream here. Thank you for changing the donations so that Australians can partner with BEMA. Yeah, you got it. You're welcome. And thank you for partnering with BEMA. Thanks to so many of you probably watching this live stream who partner with BEMA. That's awesome. You guys are making all kinds of things possible. And we couldn't be more grateful. You've made it to where Brent gets to work for us for full time. We're hiring other people. We've been able to expand our teaching team and provide them with a teaching stipend for the work that they put in. We're getting a couple more hires in the books. All of this should just continue to make BEMA hopefully better, more effective, more efficient, just better stewardship of this thing that God's doing through your generosity. So thank you all, and you're welcome. We do have some new giving platforms for that. And we've got even more giving platforms coming too, by the way, next year. So even more changes so that even more people can play. In Genesis 35, it seems as though there are some references to law. Jacob tells his family to purify themselves. Are there actual references to the law, even though it hadn't been put into place yet? So, yes and no. One of the more poetic references is that Avram had this awareness of Torah. Avram, even without Torah being defined, Avram knew what Torah looked like this transcendent idea of Torah, wisdom. Abraham tapped into it without having it on paper. And that's probably a little bit more poetic. Like that's maybe not necessarily a literal truth, but that idea is prevalent in Jewish thought. Historically speaking, if I answer this question with a more historical lens, if I put my academic hat on a little bit more than my poetic midrash hat, I would probably say that all these ancient people groups, all these ancient civilizations and cultures, the civilization that Avram came out of in Mesopotamia and Chaldea, the Sumerian cultures, they had an understanding of ethics and of law and of practice that were probably guiding Jacob's understanding of purification. It's kind of like Noah and the ark. And God tells him to, well, I don't know if God tells him directly, but he takes extra pairs of clean animals. And you're like, clean by which standard? Like Leviticus doesn't exist yet. How does he know which animals are clean or not clean? And if you want to answer that as a historian, you simply say, well, all ancient cultures had a sense of what clean animals were and what animals could be sacrificed to the gods and what animals you don't sacrifice to the gods. So call it a common historical awareness, call it ethical law. It's a good question, and we don't have great clean answers, but that's part of. I would buy a BEMA book. Well, I got good news for you, Michaela. End of 22, probably early 2023, we should be releasing a book. Stay tuned for more information. Everybody would buy a book. Look at this. I got 4 books sold already right here. Another question about Midrash. Have been looking at Rabbi Ted Falcon and others. Don't know that name. Recently, is it safe to assume that if they say this is in the Midrash, we can take them at their word? I mean, I would probably give them the benefit of the doubt, but the Midrash is a crazy place. Crazy, crazy place. The Talmud alone is unbelievably dense and wild. It's like the Wild West. So I would still just be like, yeah, I mean, the Midrash has its place. The Midrash is not scripture. So just be really careful, like what's happening with the Midrash or whatever. But yeah, if somebody says there's a Midrash, okay. The follow-up question would be, is this an authoritative Midrash? Is it a stream of canonized authoritative Jewish tradition? Is it just a random story pulled from the Agadah? None of those things mean that the Midrash is invalid. it goes back to the conversation we were having earlier in the live stream. We have to make sure that we know, and again, I do my best with this, but we always have to hold all that stuff super loosely and do our own, like, I'm not a trained rabbi. Listen to me. I am not a trained rabbi. That's why I always tell people, don't call me a rabbi. Like, if you've got to be cute, like, call little r, make it a little r. I am not a capital R rabbi. I'm not ordained. I'm not trained to handle that stuff. I don't have the authority to be weaving together my own interpretations of the midrash. I can share a midrash with you. Usually, the midrash that I like to share with uh, with others are midrash that I get from somebody who is ordained, who is taking from authorized tradition and using it appropriately, people that I can trust. So if I'm listening to an Orthodox rabbi in an Orthodox setting, and that rabbi is talking about the Midrash, I can give them even more credit. I don't know anything about Rabbi Ted Falcon, don't know anything about that. But depending on who I'm listening to, their ordination credentials, their shmicha, their authority, gives me an indication of how I can trust them. That's what I love about Rabbi David Foreman, having somebody who is ordained and has that training is just super helpful for me. I just watched Nativity with my Bible students today and do so every year. It's one of my favorites, which meant Poe Dameron got me all excited. Joseph in space. I know exactly what you're talking about. My kids, we watch Nativity Story with my kids every year. So when Star Wars came out, and it was like the weirdest, like, multiverse dimensional time warp. It was so awesome. It's like, wait. Oh, I've already sold 54. Okay, 54 books. Was Paul technically writing a midrash? Poetically, poetically, I love to call the New Testament everything after the Gospels. So all of Paul's letters, the letters, even Revelation in a sense. I like to call everything after the Gospels and Acts. Everything after Acts, I love to call inspired, authoritative midrash. That's almost a little, that's me being more poetic, a little cute, like I mean it, but I'm also not being technical, mechanical. I'm saying I like to actually let that view and that perspective somewhat. What is Paul doing? Paul's taking Tanakh, seen in Jesus, seen in Christ, and he's applying Tanakh to people's. Now, it's not necessarily story midrash. It's not necessarily midrash. It's more like application, which is also can be considered drash. Application can be considered derashah, drash. And so you can absolutely view it that way. All right, I'm all caught up on live stream. Where do I go next? We got Instagram, we got Slack. I think those are the only two that are left. I'm going to Slack. I'm going to Slack right now. Oh man, I hope that the thread didn't get super long. Whew, good. It didn't. Okay, here's the questions that were on Slack. It seems like, according to Exodus 25 and Numbers 7, that Moses entered the holy place of the tabernacle. It does read that way. By the way, I love the fact that you have Exodus 25 and number 7. Exodus 25, number 7, sitting right on either side of a Torah chiasm with Leviticus in the middle. So Moses enters the holy place here. Moses enters the holy place here, right? It can't. That's a whole nother question for a whole nother day, but I love it. Let's see here. Also in Exodus 40, Moses set up the tabernacle. He wasn't technically a priest, and only a priest could enter the holy place, right? He touched things only certain other people were supposed to touch. Uzzah was struck dead in 2 Samuel 6 for touching the ark. That's probably a whole different story. Probably not a great parallel as helpful here. But I like where your head's at. But Moses was someone pretty special, and he seemed to be. Moses was some. That's one way of putting it. Moshe was somebody special. That is absolutely correct. Was able to do more than a regular person, but can you please explain this role a bit more in the context I mentioned? Also, I sometimes wonder, since so much honor was accorded to God, the priestly garments, etc., how do we apply this to our own lives today? I have plans tonight, so I will watch the video after. She's going to watch the video after, Karina, so you'll see your answer after. But let's see. Moses, obviously from the tribe of Levi, so from the priestly tribe. And obviously we're talking about Moshe here, like Moshe, like the prophet, the one that God chose, the one who saw God like read Moshe's epitaph in the book of Deuteronomy. It's like moving, it's emotional. Not many people would have the epitaph that Moses would have, right? So he's something. He's something else. He's certainly not below Aaron. I don't know if he's above Aaron. I mean, I kind of feel like, yeah, he's above Aaron. He's the one that established the system that Aaron's a part of. So, in a sense, we see Moses functioning as a priest all the time, in conceptual ways or even literal ways, because he's the leader. Now, I don't think that that was a habit for Moses. I think he probably respected those systems, and he didn't just kind of like find himself. There's discussion about the tent of meeting and how you read it in Torah. Is the tent of meeting a separate tent? Is the tent of meeting the tabernacle? Is the tent of meeting because Moses goes into the tent of meeting to talk with God. I mean, if that's the case, you would assume he's going. If it's the tabernacle, you would assume he's going into the holy of holies almost like every day. Now, I don't typically hold that view. I think the tent of meeting was a different place than the tabernacle, but people read that in all kinds of ways, and the language is tricky and doesn't offer us much by way of help. But yeah, the main answer to that question is kind of I put Moses in a different. He's Moses. Like outside of Jesus, there's Moses. So Jesus is on the Mount of Transfiguration. He's got who with him? Moses and Elijah. That's pretty good company. Um, uh, Avram's not even there. So anyway, just some thoughts as far as the priestly garments, those kind of things. The temple and the temple system, the priesthood, the items of the tabernacle, all that stuff they were tools. It was a system that was designed to um, to teach God's people how to discern between the holy and the common, between light and darkness, between righteousness and unrighteousness. Between the whole system was there not to keep people out. It ended up getting abused in that way. It got abused in that sense. But the system itself was designed um, to teach us how to discern, to pull apart, to understand, so that when we went out into the world, we could find God, we could find the holy in all the other places. The tabernacle, the temple was a teaching tool. What happened was it got turned into the point, and it's a pretty big deal. Like, don't let me speak like down about the tabernacle. It was where the presence of God lived. Like it was the temple. They didn't even say the word temple. They called it the house because they had that kind of reverence for it. But everything kind of got reordered and it became the center of gravity rather than the instructional piece that taught God's people how to live and move within the world. So if you understood the temple correctly, you could turn around and face the world and know how to live correctly in the world. That was the point of the tabernacle and the temple. And what they turned it into was a purity code that kept people out. Rather than equipping people to go out, it kept people out and away from the presence of God and from the mission uh, entirely. I think that is where we find most of our application today. Do we have the ability to discern between uh, light and darkness, between holy and common? And I know Christians think, man, we think we're the best at this, don't we? We know how to interpret good from bad. We've eaten from the tree of the knowledge of good and evil. We sure know we're the cosmic policeman for the world. And and I think there's a lesson there to be learned from what happens when you start to forget what these systems are supposed to teach us. Not just the temple itself, but what are our systems? What are our traditions? What are the same things that happen here? Do we know what is holy and what is common? Do we know how to find God out in the middle of the profane? Can we find the holy in the middle of the impure? Because that's what we're supposed to be able to do, especially in Christ. Um, and yet, most of the time, we use all this stuff just to keep people out, don't we? Like we're so worked up about making sure that there's a group of people going to hell. Um, we're so worked up about making sure that like salvation in heaven is the only thing Yeah, I think there's a lot to actually learn here. So I really like your question, Karina. I really do. What are your thoughts about divine punishment in the Bible versus today? To be more specific, I recently read an article where the author was talking about Absalom and how his behavior was punishment for David and Bathsheba. He then took that situation and applied it to today, saying disobedience equals punishment, and talked about how God disciplines those he loves. Um, and then she gives the context here. So the context under discussion would be 2 Samuel 12, 9 through 11, for anybody curious about where that question is coming from. Yeah, a lot of really helpful things here. I think everything is being forced into this mechanic in that situation, and it's being done really poorly by whoever probably is behind some of the teaching. And I wasn't there, I didn't hear it, so there's probably a million redeeming things about it too. But in this way, all this stuff is kind of being weaponized and mechanized is actually the bigger issue for me. I don't even know if it's being weaponized, but it's being put together in a mechanic so that disobedience and punishment. A lot of times, Westerners, we look back on the Bible, which is looking back on a story. So the Bible is looking back on a story and an event, and they're extracting meaning from that event. There was actually a rabbi I was reading about recently that said Christians read the Bible looking for truth. Jews read the Bible looking for meaning, and there's a difference. So when you read the story of David, Absalom, discipline, punishment, all those things, that is a story that's being written as God's people kind of look back on this thing that happened, and they're saying, here's the meaning we can extract from that. Westerners, that conversation, by the way, is very concrete. Westerners will take that concrete situation, they'll move it into the abstract, and they almost always do the Western thing with it. They make it causative. So, what caused it? A plus B equals C. So, if this perspective is true, then that means that punishment, discipline, A plus B equals C. What this teacher was doing with this sense of, and that's quite literally is just a fallacy of logic. Like that's illogical. That's an assumption, a false assumption, a false, I want to say false dichotomy, but there's another word for that fallacy. Anyway, just because when you're looking at a thing and this group of people is looking back going, I can now see through the lens of perspective and time and maturity that what was happening in that, what happened in my life, David might say, he wasn't the one writing, but David might say to us, what I went through there was the consequences, the circumstances I had to deal with because of my foolishness and my folly. Because I did something stupid and dumb and wrong, like really wrong, like adulterous murder wrong, right? I engaged in something and then I had to reap the circumstances. I had to deal with the fallout of that dumb decision. So in David's mind, as he looks on that situation, he's like, or the author of Samuel here, Second Samuel, says, "Wow, oh, look at the discipline of God. Is that incorrect? Absolutely not. Not when you're keeping it in the proper place, having the right conversation with the right perspective." What Western theologians do is we lift it out of that conversation, we move it detached from David's experience, detached from the author's perspective, we move it into the abstract Platonic Greek realm, and then we talk about what causes what and God and who sins what and how God orchestrates punishment and discipline. And that's a totally different conversation and connection. And so a part of good hermeneutics is making sure that we're keeping those things and applying those things and making sure that we're not using mechanics, mechanisms, systems, and systematic theology that doesn't actually exist within that story. That's part of how I love to see the beauty and the value of somebody looking at their circumstances and saying, I experience the discipline of God. I think it's totally something completely different to then say, okay, so God sent that, used that, God orchestrated that, God was in charge of that in order to punish David. If you stand from here looking in, it sounds completely different than if you stand from here looking in. And those perspectives matter. And we have to keep our hermeneutics in the right perspective, looking through the right window, because if you change that, the theology radically changes, and that really matters. It's an excellent question. It's an excellent question. Um, was it hard for you when deconstructing to truly understand what pleases God and what doesn't, like sin and righteousness? Because when we don't see God as a tyrant but a loving father, we have more security, freedom in Christ. Absolutely. Did I find it hard when I was to understand what pleases God? I know a lot of people do. My situation, I can't say I remember or feel like there was a ton of that present in my own deconstruction journey. No. Um, and I don't know if that's because of my personality and my tendency to I have some narcissistic tendencies. I might have a little bit of overconfidence at times, some self-absorption, which all of which has horrible sinful sides to it. Um, but honestly, I feel like it probably wasn't those things as it probably in part it was, but it wasn't those things nearly as much as I don't know. I mean, so much of what I was deconstructing was the world that my parents and their faith had handed me. But I also I had like this I had this rock solid bedrock foundational belief in the love of God. I never questioned that. In fact, when theology started to go sideways, I almost always held it against the love of God. Um, and I've wondered at times if that wasn't a part of what my parents handed me too. Like my parents handed me a lot of dysfunctional stuff. And not just my parents, like the world of my parents, the church of my parents, the faith of my parents, the Christian worldview, the fundamentalist worldview I was raised in, handed me a lot of stuff that was crazy and whack. And but I also wonder if somewhere in the midst of all of that, if somebody or something or that system itself also handed me the love of God clearly, concisely, and in a compelling way because I never maybe that's just an awareness. I know Jonathan Martin wrote a book called Prototype, one of my favorite books. And in it, he says, he has this image. He says, I think inside of every single one of us is a boy on a bike, a little boy riding a bicycle, or a little girl jumping on a trampoline. And deep in our psyche, this young, innocent, childish psyche, we know beyond the shadow of a doubt that we are loved. We are beloved. We couldn't articulate it. We don't have a theological awareness. We know. And that was my experience. As I went through deconstruction, I never really felt, and I know many people do, and for lots of different reasons, and I won't unpack that all here. Just for my experience, I always had this foundational, unshakable belief that I was loved by God and that God loved others. And my theology was screwed up because it didn't back up that reality. Um, that's always been, like, just one of my core and not because I learned it, I don't think. I mean, maybe I learned it, but not because I learned it in Bible college, not because I got it in a class. So that's uh, and I'm thankful. If that's the result of my fundamentalist worldview, they got one of the most important things right, and I don't see that happening enough. We need to get that more right. We need to get that way, way more right, and we need to change the way that we treat people and love people without a shadow beyond the shadow of a doubt. But wherever that came from, I praise God. I bless God for that. So, good question. Last question here from Colin. Marty talked about the foolishness of trying to get teens to be pure at a time when the hormones are going ballistic. I don't know if I would word it that way, Colin, but I appreciate what you're saying. Yes, it's in session 2 when we get to Song of Songs. I want to get more thoughts on that as it's an active conversation with 3 teens in my home. I don't think let me critique the wording here, and I might have even said this. I probably said it poorly. Marty talked about the foolishness of trying to get teens to be pure at a time when hormones are going ballistic. I wouldn't say foolishness at all. I think what's foolish is to not be honest and address the fact that your biological body is wired to be doing one thing and our ever evolving, socially evolving world, for better or for worse, and I think it's both better and worse, our socially evolving world is now making that sexual union, that that hormone driven connection that so many of us crave, many of us will find, not all of us will or are called to or even want to. And that's a part of this conversation too. But at a time where you're like, that's a part of your holistic, your sexuality is a part of your holistic self. Like there's a healthy expression of sexuality inside of all of us, whether we're married or not, whether we get to exercise that sexuality in whatever ways or not. That's a part of who we are, and it's developing at a point in our life. And the Industrial Revolution and college and 21st century America pulls that further and further. And I'm listen to me, I'm not suggesting getting married at 13. That is not where this conversation lands. But our world is evolving. Our social consciousness is evolving. And I'm not sure we've been honest as Christians about what that struggle looks like for our kids. I do not think it's full. Listen, I got a daughter turning 13 next week. I have a son who's 11 and a half. You better believe I'm trying to teach them to be pure. You better believe. But I'm going to try to have those conversations in ways that are completely honest and authentic, in ways that um I mean, I'm going to tell my son, the world is not built for your success here, but the way that you treat women matters. For over and above even conversations about his own sexual indulgence and keeping it in his pants and what, like, yeah, the more important thing is how in the world we're treating men and women, human beings. Um, that sexuality is an exchange that's meant for a particular context. And when you take it out of that context, what you do is you hurt people. It has an effect on people and relationships. And so, um, yeah, you better believe that I'm going to be trying to teach my son and my daughter, but I'm going to try to do it in a way that's not just about Christian morality, just like projected onto them. Like, well, you can't do this and you can't do that and you can't do this and figure it out. Like, that's kind of what I felt like growing up. And I was like, well, wait a minute. Uh, I had no space to talk about it. Any sexual failure was filled with shame on every level, filled with shame, from parents to mentors to churches to workspaces to school. There was no place to navigate. If you remember in session 2, I get pretty worked up about this topic. Can you tell? So I'm with you, and I ain't. Let's see, Colin said after you shared the caution around sexuality, my question on Slack may delve into it does, but I'm dodging it, so we're okay. Asking you to expand on your thoughts on teens and purity hormones, right? Yeah. I appreciate that, Colin. I love your question. Don't hear like my frustrated to be at your question. No. This is super important, and I'm probably most frustrated because we don't have a bunch of helpful tools, from myself included. I don't have a bunch of answers for this. I just know how freaking ill-equipped and judged and alone, and I'm a guy. Like, do you have any idea what purity culture has done to women? Not I'm not mad at you, Colin, that I do you know Colin? No, I'm not talking to you. I'm just talking to all of us. Like, what are the repercussions of man, we gotta grapple with this stuff. We gotta figure out what it means to talk about this stuff in ways that are healthy, productive, and protect people, and elevate the humanity of others, and anyway, okay, we're all done with Slack questions. There you go, Colin. I don't know if I dealt with that well, but what do we got here? We got live stream and then I got Instagram. I don't know if I'm gonna get them done. We're gonna find out. Um, inspired authority. Yeah, I'm buying one. Yeah. Good. Put questions here. All right, we're all good. I'm gonna do Instagram. Where's my phone? I can hear my phone beeping. in the room out there. We'll see if somebody brings it to me. Is anybody going to help me out? Probably not. I was hoping for a family member. I don't think I hear anybody. I'm going to go try to get my phone because that's the only way I'm going to get my Instagram questions. Hold on. Stay there. All right, we're back. Sorry. That was a fun little ditty. Every live stream has some fun moment. That was our fun moment. All right. What do we got going on here? 6 questions. Oh yeah, Chelsea's got some good comments there too. All right, I missed this question last time, so we're going to answer it here. Adding that question about how you feel about Christians smoking marijuana. Does it keep me up at night? I've found it interesting to listen to all kinds of people talk about it from all kinds of different ways. Here's some of the things that drive the conversation for me. Whenever it comes to consumption, indulgence, substances, there is a created hierarchy where there's God, human beings, and creation. God made creation, and then he made human beings and asked them to care and steward for creation. In between, anytime you get that created hierarchy out of whack, anytime humans try to put themselves above God, anytime that creation. So part of the reason that drunkenness is such a problem is that you're letting creation rule over you, like as a principle. Part of the reason why. So one of my issues with consumption of any substance is if we're deliberately engaging the consumption of that substance to alter our state of consciousness. It just feels wacky to me theologically. It feels like I'm getting the created order out of whack. Maybe there are other ways. Listen, I've never smoked weed in my life. I have no idea. I don't get it. I'm not an expert in it. A million people are going to say I'm an idiot, and I get all that. Please don't try to explain it to me in the comment section. I don't. Maybe there are ways to do that in ways that don't alter your state of. I don't know. I'm just listening to the way that people talk about it. That's one thing. The other guiding principle, Paul says in Timothy, since we know that the whole earth is God's and he made it and the whole earth is good, since we know that creation is good, 1 Timothy 4, 1 through 4. He says there's going to come a time when people are going to teach crazy false teachings. And it's going to come from teachers whose consciences have been seared as with a hot iron. They follow the teaching of demons. That's a thing. The teaching of demons. Yeah, that must be super bad. So what does Paul tell Timothy they do? They teach people not to eat certain foods or to get married. That's the false teaching that comes from demons. So Paul says to Timothy in the next verse, so since we know that all creation is good and is meant to be enjoyed as long as it's received through, as long as it's consecrated through the word of God and through prayer. What does that mean? I think it means, in my opinion, that we're supposed to be able to engage creation, steward creation, receive creation in ways that are aligned with God's original intent. Are we using creation the way that God designed creation to be used? So I have no problem with a medicinal marijuana usage. Seems to bring wholeness, seems to bring peace, seems to alleviate pain, seems to bring healing, seems okay, that's fine. Not going to get any pushback from me on that one. It's this other indulgent recreational use that seems to be engaged for the pure purpose of altering our state of consciousness. But there's probably a million other layers to that. Again, I'm no expert and I lose no sleep over this. None. Don't care. Don't care. I meet people all the time talking about, I don't know, they might tell me about how they smoke weed. Got lots of friends that smoke weed. Cool. Uh, don't care. I don't feel the need to like correct them or give them a lecture about First Timothy 4 or the theology of creational hierarchy. Yeah. Much more important things that I want to care about and worry about. There you go. Those are the two principles that matter to me at this point. Maybe I'll know a whole lot more later, but that's where I'm at today. There you go. I have no endorsement. I don't stay up at night freaking out about it. So how's that for middle ground, huh? Yeah. Okay. What does Romans 10, 9 through 10 mean when it says you will be saved and confession with the mouth resulting in salvation? Saved from what? Salvation from what? Is it hell? Well, the phrase there being used in Romans 10 is an absolute ripoff and a subversion of a Roman slogan. So think about other political slogans that we might know of. Uh, make America great again. Think about build back better. Imagine if there was a political slogan that then got co opted by an inspired apostolic author. That's what's happening in Romans. Rome had a slogan that appeared in a few different places that we found. There is no other name under heaven which a person can be, I believe the word is saved, than that of Caesar Augustus. So when Paul uses that same phrase, he is purposely subverting Roman propaganda, saying Caesar is not the king he claims to be. Jesus is king. And you are being asked to give your allegiance to a new king and a new kingdom. When we understand that, it seems weird to kind of like, again, do what Westerners do with everything. We take a concrete expression, which we don't always realize is a concrete expression. We move it into the abstract. We write all of this systematic theology about it, and bada bing, bada boom. And to look at this and realize actually questions about salvation from what, heaven, hell, uh, just doesn't fit with Romans 10. And so, um, and obviously, I know your question really revolves more about saved and salvation. It's not your question is directly about Romans 10, and Romans 10 ain't talking about that. I do think I keep saying this. I just get endless conversations about salvation and heaven and hell. And honestly, I feel like we Christians need to have a real serious reckoning. This isn't, by the way, this is not um, Graham. This is not an attack on you and your question. I appreciate it. There's a host of people that have very similar questions with you. But I think we as Christians, and a lot of us have been taught this. It's not our fault. We've been taught to orient ourselves around this. We need to have a real honest reckoning with why, as Christians, salvation and heaven is our gravitational center of our faith. Because that doesn't come from the Bible. And it really makes us messed up people. It makes us jerks because the gravitational center of our faith is not around Jesus and what he invited us to make the gravitational center of our faith, to love God and to love others. When we let Gnostic theology and Platonic understandings of the afterlife drive our theology and the whole point behind the mission, it totally shifts what we do and who we become. So I purposely didn't answer your question because I think we need to learn how to ask better questions. When we change the center of gravity of our faith, we can re-ask that question. But the problem is, or not the problem, the beauty is if we were to change the gravitational center of our faith, that would no longer be the question. Do you see? Um, And we need to come to grips with that. As Christians, we need to absolutely do some freaking heavy soul searching with that. It's not directed at you, Graham. It's nothing to do with you. Your question is great. That's all of us Christians who follow Jesus. How do you interpret John 6:25 through 59? This is going to be the eat my flesh, drink my blood. From a more Eastern perspective, I recently came across a passage and made me think about the Eucharist and how different people view it. It's a huge point of contention between Catholics and Protestants. So I was wondering how the people around Jesus would have understood it back then. Was he actually saying that they would eat his body and drink his blood? I'm going to say no. Not that that's just like case closed, but I'm going to say no for the sake of time. It's 9:58. In the sense of taking communion today, does it matter which way we view the Eucharist? And not nearly as much as I think it does, as we think it does. That whole chapter is about neither of those things, Catholic, Protestant. It is tricky though. It's actually one of the most difficult passages in my mind in the entire New Testament to grapple with. David Flusser, who was an Orthodox Jewish scholar and an expert on Jesus and the Gospels, was not a follower of Jesus, but gave his life to kind of like understanding the Christian Gospels and what's going on there from a Jewish perspective. Let's see here. He believed that Jesus never taught this in person. Maybe he taught something similar, but then John later retold it in a way that kind of like tickled the pagan ears. Now, I don't agree with that. I don't read John that way. My commitment to inspiration keeps me from saying that, but that's how crazy that teaching sounds in a Jewish context. Flusser said there's no way. There's no way he taught that. In a Greek context, in a pagan context, it's easy. It's easy to explain. For John and his audience, all kinds of pagan rituals had you consuming raw meat. And in that teaching, they taught that you were consuming the flesh of the God. You would drink wine and you were consuming the blood of the God. And in doing so, you put the God in you and the power of the God flowed through you. So that was your Greek context. So that part's easy about John 6. The much more difficult part is if Jesus literally taught that in Capernaum. What in the world did they do with that in a Jewish context? Because that is, and I have wrestled with the possible remez, an allusion to the Old Testament, and there's some possibilities, but nothing that just like land with a thunderous yes. So that one's tricky. That one is legitimately tricky. And I don't have a great answer for you other than some of that context there. So good question, Derek. Really good question. And we're going to start a verse by verse study of John starting here in January. So it's coming. It's coming. I think we only got a couple more questions here. Oop, maybe a few. We'll try to get these done, then we'll be done. Archaeologists found the oldest bones of humans dating back to 300,000 years. I mean, that would be debated, but I'm with you. Okay, yes. I can't remember if this is from the podcast or somewhere else, but it said that right around David is the furthest we can go back in biblical history. It's, again, generally true, debated, but yes, as far as like direct evidence, what we mean by that is where you can undeniably attach historical evidence to historical Bible teaching and characters. So, let's see here. How then do we reconcile the gap between the first humans 300,000 years ago and around 1000 BC? Was God just silent during that time? I think what you're asking for, and I think this is Michael here. I think what you're asking for here is how do we account for faith and the God consciousness in that span of time? Just because we don't have evidence for David, I assume that the stories of the Bible are based on real experience. I assume they're based on real history. I assume that there was actually a people, the people of God, the nation of Judah and Israel. I assume that the nation of Israel came and settled in the land of Canaan, whether it was by conquest in the book of Joshua or assimilation in the book of Judges. I assume that on some level there was a people of God living in Egypt that made an exodus. I assume all those things to be true. There's evidence that there was a Semitic people in Egypt during the time when we need. There's all kinds of historical evidence. Again, can you tie the evidence together? Can you make indisputable? No, but there's all kinds of evidence to assume that the biblical narrative is true. Even then, we still have this large gap. And listen, there's going to be a ton of people here that don't buy into evolutionary history. They're going to say it's a young Earth. We're told all about exactly what happened in Genesis. That's fine. For those of us that maybe cling to a more evolutionary worldview that says there's a more evolutionary development, what do I do? What do I do with cavemen? I think that's your question. I could be getting it wrong. I think your question is, what do you do with early humanoids um, that don't have the Bible or even language? Or what do you do with that? And I'm going to assume that God calls his creation good. I'm going to assume that God loves his creation. I'm going to assume that God always meets his creation where they're at. And when human consciousness was developed enough, God walked right into that story right along with them, that there wasn't a vacuum that was void of the creator. I mean, that's not a part of the biblical narrative or historical record outside of the biblical narrative. Those are just some of my assumptions based on the biblical story of what I know about God and what he's invited me to believe about the world. So, um, those are some, it's a really good question. I've wrestled with that question a lot myself. I mean, obviously I don't have answers. I wasn't there. You weren't there. History, if that is true about history, maybe all the young earth people are right. Maybe the earth is only 6,000 years old and Genesis tells us exactly how it happened, and there you go. Maybe they're right and everybody else is idiots. But for if they're not, and if there's some truth to this other, I've wrestled with that too. And my and again, the reason why that's a problem, please hear me, Westerners, Western Christians. The reason that's a problem is because uh, of our systematic theology that is founded on a foundation of human depravity that says that every human being is destined for hell. And and I'm not necessarily proposing the opposite of that. I'm just saying it's actually our systematic theology that creates the problem here, not history. It's our systematic theology that creates the problem. So maybe those are the things that we ought to be examining so that the God that we meet in the scriptures can fit in history in better ways. So anyway, just some thoughts. Thanks for all the work you and the team do. I am working my way through the prophets and have a question about the end of Job. It mentions that he had 7 sons and 3 daughters, and then goes on to name all the daughters, but none of the sons. That's a great. Is there a reason for this that you know of? I've noticed the same thing. I have no answer for you. That is such a great question. I have noticed it, and I haven't went really looking for an answer yet either. So I don't know. I would assume so, but I don't know what it is. So, fantastic question. Fantastic freaking question. I have no answer for you. Um, Eschatology question. If heaven is invading earth over time and not just a point in time, and Jesus, John the Baptist came announcing the arrival of the kingdom of heaven, could Hellenism be what end times people call the one world order? Um, or New World Order. I don't know these things about end times. Most of those conversations scare me. We will get into that. All I'm going to say for now is we will get into apocalyptic literature and how it works. We will deal with it using the exact same hermeneutic that we deal with everything else in the scripture. And we will rob you of this fear that eschatology is scary and crazy. We'll get rid of all that, and it will be but I don't. New World Order is just a bad reading of the Bible. None of that. That's just a complete weird, bad hermeneutics, bad projection, really bad reading and rendering of the scriptures in my mind. We'll get there. We'll get there. We'll get there. For now, especially because it's 10:07, that's what I'm going to tell you. Good question. But it'll be less relevant when we unpack apocalyptic literature. Last one, 2 questions. What does it mean to trust the story? I actually really appreciate this question, and I'm if I appear frustrated, it's because I'm more frustrated that I don't make this more clear in my teaching. That because it's the foundation. It is the hinge point. It is, I mean, it's the tagline for everything that we do. Trust the story. What does it mean to trust the story? So trust, many have argued, is the Hebrew rendering of the idea of faith. Like you, a better, like Hebrew really doesn't have the word faith. The word that Hebrew has to express that idea is trust. So trusting the story is really another way of saying faith. Now, I don't say that so that we can now cloak it in all our Protestant theology about faith and faithfulness and saved by faith and all that kind of sola fide. Like, but when I say trust the story, I'm talking about the concept of faith. When I say trust the story I'm referring to is the truth of creation one. When I say trust the story, I'm saying trust in God. I'm saying trust in what God told us about who he was. I'm saying trust in what God told us about who we are. I'm saying trust in what God told us about creation. Trust in what God told us. Trust the story. When God made creation and he said it's good, trust that. When you were a part of that creation and God said it's good, God looked at you and me as human beings and said, it's good. Trust that. Trust that that's more true than our mistakes and our failures and our depravity, wherever it is. And our depravity is very true. Hopefully, none of us are confused about that. We are sinful creatures. Sin and rebellion is a destructive reality. But um, would we cling more to the truth of our identity as a part of God's good creation than um, than our identity as depraved piles of garbage, theological garbage? That's what I mean. Trust that. Trust in the goodness of God. Trust in the sovereignty of God. I don't mean sovereignty as in Calvinistic theology. I mean trust that God as creator has it. He's got it. It's his creation. He's wild about it. He loves it. When you do that, where did sin come from? You see, when we start the story with sinfulness, we get the story all messed up. But that's the story most of us trust. We actually trust the wrong story. We trust the story of sinfulness and a need to be rescued so that we can go to heaven and get salvation from sin. But sin is not where the story begins. Sin is not where the story ends. Sin is an intruder in the story. It arrived late and will be leaving early. Trust in the greater story, the story that was there before sin and the story that will exist after sin. Because then we can put sin in its proper place and we can realize that sin is a byproduct of something else. And what is it a byproduct of? Not trusting the story. When we don't trust in the goodness of God and the grace of God and the goodness of creation and our place in that goodness, when we don't sit back and just trust, even when we make mistakes, what does God tell Cain? He shows up with Cain. He's like, Cain, I know you made a mistake. Who cares? If you do what's right, won't you be accepted? If you don't do what's right, you're going to do something really stupid. Sin is a byproduct of us not trusting the story. If Cain would have just sat back and trusted the story, and I don't mean to say that to make that trivial. But if Cain would have trusted the story, he could have put his mistake aside, done what was right, and the story would have been completely, totally different. But when we let fear that we're not enough, fear that it's not good, fear that God's not good, fear that God's holding out on us, when we let fear and insecurity drive the truck, we make a mess out of ourselves and the world around us. But when we trust that we're loved, that even when we make mistakes, we're still loved. Grace sounds like the gospel, doesn't it? Kind of sounds like Jesus all the way back in Genesis. Yes, because trust the story is a reference to the foundational truth of the gospel. You are loved. Trust that. Trust in your identity as beloved of God. not a humanism, not your ability to perform and be awesome. Nope. We're really not all that great, but God is, and his love is greater than anything. Nothing could separate us. What are your thoughts? The pseudepigraphal writings as the book of Enoch, the tree of life of Adam and Eve. Are they anything like the Midrash? Some of them are Midrash. Some of them aren't. Some of them have more value than others. Some of them are just nonsense. Some of them are worth looking at. I don't spend hardly any of my time with the Apocrypha, with the pseudepigrapha, because I have so much that I want to learn about the Bible. I have so much that I want to learn about the Bible. I have so much that I want to learn. I'll spend the rest of my life in the canon. And I know that other people like study Enoch. That's great. Write me an email and tell me all about what it says, and I'll pick up stuff here and there. But man, I got so much stuff I want to learn about the canon and where the people of God have been and where we're going. I'll probably spend the rest of my life just trying to memorize that, study that, learn that, know that. So anyway, those are some of my thoughts. Let's see here. Yep. Love it. Yeah. Thanks for the good words. Good words, Colin. Encouraging. Yep. You're welcome, Diane. Karina, yes. Love it. Colin, yep. The center, the pull, the gravitational center of the Christian's faith. Love God and love others. Chill 77. What should we teach about the center of gravity? To love God and to love others. The center of gravity should be a cleaving. This is Jewish thought. All of it is designed to help us cleave to God, to know God, to be one with God, to have that relationship, to be enveloped in his love, to know his love, to give that love to other people. That should be. You guys are all awesome. Thanks for coming to the live stream. We're only 14 minutes late, probably 15 by the time I get done saying goodbye, but always fun. It's always fun. There were some great questions today. Man, you guys killed it with the questions. I think we got it all. We got Twitter, we got Instagram, we got Facebook, we got Slack, we got YouTube Live, we got email, we got Instagram. We did it. Okay. Oh, do I, Matt, or go? And then you drop a question in. We were all done, Matt. And then you drop a question. I know, Matt. That's why I'm giving him a hard time. I do not consider the Deuterocanonical books canon. I consider them maybe more interesting and relevant to look at than maybe some others, but I don't consider them canon. That's my quick question. Matt, it was so good to see you. We have not talked enough, Matt Argo. We have not talked enough, but we should talk. I should swing through Western Washington someday soon. Okay, guys, thanks for hanging out with me today. It was awesome. When's our next one? This is December. Let's look and see where our next one is. Our next one should be January 16th. That's a Sunday night. It's on Facebook, the Bema Facebook. It's going to be our next live stream Q&A. Bema Facebook, January 16th, 8 p.m. Eastern, 5 p.m. Pacific. All right, everybody. It's great to see you all. We'll talk to you later. Have a good night.